Neptune in peace-loving Libra started while the world was still at war, although most of this generation were born into the wealthy post-war boom, hence called the baby boomers. This generation escaped the austerity of the 30s with a new idealism around peace and relationships, growing up to be the flower children of the 1960s. With added Pluto and self-focused Leo, this generation is also called the me generation. The era began in 1942 with an air trine between Neptune and Uranus, reflecting a vision of progress, political and social change.
The future must bring equal wages for equal work, regardless of sex or race.
By 1950, Uranus's move into emotional home and country Cancer squares Neptune, bringing the Red Scare, McCarthyism's attack on political and social dissent.
To understand communism, its basic godless philosophy, its goal of world conquest, its insidious tactics, and its cunning strategy.
Conservatism reigned in the Neptune Libra era, with kingly Pluto in Leo and his perfect Libra Neptune wife, promoting ultra-polarized gender roles with a fully encouraged family lifestyle, creating an unprecedented population boom in the wealthier West, creating a new demographic of teenagers to challenge their parents in the following era.
Got my bag, got my reservation, spend each dime.
With Neptune in Libra, marriage was back in fashion and at an all-time high, with women getting married at younger ages than in previous generations.
I long to hear that all aboard.
Divorce was also fast becoming a reality in modern Western life, even with continued legal restrictions.
But I prefer a man who lives and gives expensive jewels.
After the 1930s diamond price collapse, in 1947 the diamond cartel De Beers began a marketing campaign with the slogan, "A diamond is forever." Their campaign convinced society not only the need for an engagement ring, but that a diamond is the only acceptable stone.
Help you at the automat. Men grow cold as girls grow old, and we all lose our charms in the end.
The symbolic nature of this era beginning during the Second World War constantly resounds in the Libran polarity of warlike Aries. During the preparation for the United States to drop the first atomic bomb in Japan, over 150 scientists had petitioned President Truman, saying using the bomb was morally apprehensible and would create a potential nuclear arms race. This was the era of the creation of the Aries-like military-industrial complex.
Let's move down to some big town where they love a gal by the cut of her clothes, and I'll stand out
And the famous split in the psychoanalysis world between Zygmunt's daughter, Anna Freud, and Melanie Klein, whose definitive paper, symbolic of the era, describes the developing mind splitting the external world into a good and bad, black and white dichotomy. With judicial Jupiter conjunct Neptune in legal Libra, the Nuremberg trials begin. This same year, the United Nations was founded, described at the time as 51 separate countries of sovereign equality, with the Libran ideal that even the smallest country being equal to that of the biggest.
Let's vamoose where gals keep using those silks and satins and linens that shows, and I'm all yours in buttons and bows.
Silks and satins and linen that shows, and I'm all yours in buttons and bows.
Give me Eastern trimming where women are women in high silk hose and peekaboo clothes and French.
During the Neptune in Libra post-war period, governments increasingly saw their role as balancing capitalism.
Buttons and
Roses and flowers and buttons and bows, rings and
with new elite banker organizations created like the IMF, making loans to developing nations with a non-negotiable privatization of assets. World Bank was also created at this time with a charming Libra-Neptune square to authoritative Saturn in Cancer, created to build post-war economic order, but developing a reputation at the time as a supporter of military dictatorships.
We three, we're not a crowd. We're not even company. My echo, my shadow, and me.
In 1946, with the Moon, Mercury and Venus conjunct Pluto, sextile Neptune, the Mental Health Act is passed, empowering Freudian psychoanalysis to new heights of influence. Suitable for Neptune and Libra, marriage counselors were trained in their thousands to apply Freudian psychoanalysis to marriage counseling. Freudian psychoanalysis now completely dominated the advertising industry, or as it was said, getting the id to go shopping. With Neptune in aesthetic-oriented Libra, mastermind Ernest Dichter stressed the importance of image and unconscious allure in marketing. In 1946, with controlling Pluto conjunct corporate and karmic Saturn, sextile Neptune in Libra, the oil industry creates the Smoke and Fumes Committee, a research committee created to, quote, promote public skepticism of environmental science and regulations. As these scientific forays develop, documents only released in 2016 reveal Humble Oil, now ExxonMobil, was aware of climate change by the early 1950s and was actively funding and publishing research into skepticism and alternative theories on global warming.
Well, whether you know it or not, every single preparation on this beautiful lady's dressing table, every single thing she is wearing, is influenced by oil. Here's a string of sparklers that have never been closer to a diamond mine than the Shell Development Laboratories. The shampoo she used on her hair, her comb, the lacquer on her nails, and her makeup, all or in part have come out of some oil well. Just for fun, let's take away all these articles dependent upon petroleum. Her hand mirror, cosmetics, perfume, and manicure set made of plastics. Her synthetic silk negligee, her silk under...
Whether because of Neptune in Libra's political savvy or its uncompromising Aries polarity, this was the era of oil's big takeover, fueling foreign coups and an unprecedented wiping out of transport alternatives. During Neptune's 14 years in Libra, a consortium of big oil-associated companies lobbied politicians successfully to replace America's widespread electrical cable car system with the new oil-guzzling bus system. Although being in legal Libra, in 1949 the consortium were convicted of conspiring to monopolize the sale of buses by replacing the transport infrastructure.
Always thinking how I miss my happiness. A million years it seems have gone by since we shared our dreams.
With the earliest incarnations of Aries dominated NATO, and the plutonic CIA, supporting terrorist attacks against peaceful civilians in allied countries for the purpose of blaming and discrediting left-wing political groups.
Any place on earth will do, just as long as I'm with you.
With the CIA enlisting members of the Nazi SS force to assist them in their clandestine terrorism. Formed in 1948, it remained secretly in operation till its exposure in the late 1980s.
Recalls, oh, if I broke your heart last night, it's because I love you most of all. A foggy day in London town had me low, had me down. I view the morning with alarm. The British Museum had lost its charm. How long, I wonder.
With Neptune in Libra square Uranus in homely Cancer, a sudden new suburbia of ready-built neighborhoods serves the post-war nuclear family fantasy. With cars now affordable, living outside cities became known as white flight. With electric Uranus in domestic Cancer square Neptune, the combined use of electroshock and the psychosurgery of lobotomies hit their peak in the USA.
No matter where they go or what they do, they always try to remember what to do if the atom bomb explodes right then. It's a bomb, duck and cover.
The Duck and Cover campaign came out of Neptune squaring atomic Uranus in the early 1950s. Neptune in Libra's consistent us and them theme squaring an isolationist Uranus brought Cold War consciousness to the masses. The balancing scales of Libra, partitioning India and Palestine to create Pakistan and Israel, the Korean split, and Europe being divided into an East and Western bloc. In 1952, with Saturn conjunct Neptune in Libra at odds with freedom-loving Uranus in Cancer, political philosopher Leo Strauss publishes Persecution and the Art of Writing.
Till the end of time.
Strauss's students go on in later decades to influence the neo-conservative movement.
There's a spring, a bird to sing, I'll go on loving you till the end of time. Long as roses bloom in May, my love for you.
In 1953, a Saturn exactly conjunct Neptune, exactly square a Mercury-Uranus conjunction in home and country Cancer, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were executed for espionage. The preceding trial marked a turn in Cold War obedience, activating a strong social movement critical of the conviction.
The family was solidly founded on the father as patriarch and breadwinner, and on the mother as cook, housekeeper, and nurse of the children. One of the trends of modern life, which has been cited as most disruptive of marriage, is the increasing economic independence of women.
With Neptune square disruptive Uranus in domestic Cancer, a new war was waged on the growing menace of feminism, with the American Psychological Association being amongst the most critical and appropriating the term momism.
Till the end of time.
Abandoning their feminine role has made women unhappy because it has made them frustrated. It has made children unhappy because they do not have maternal love. And it has made their husbands unhappy because they do not have real women as partners. Instead, their wives have become their rivals.
During the early 1950s, the reactionary and atomic planet of Uranus was crossing the USA's stellium of Cancer planets, feeding the nuclear buildup and Red Scare in its square to peace-loving Neptune in Libra. Culminating in plutonium-Pluto's move into the USA's ninth house of foreign affairs in 1953, as President Truman announces the USA has developed an even more powerful hydrogen bomb. With intensified nuclear threats and testing, as Pluto transits the USA's ninth house over the next decade and a half, instigating foreign coups and outright war, the USA's plutonic foreign influence would be one of power, subterfuge, and violence. In 1953, with Uranus and Neptune exactly square, the CIA sanctioned Project MK-Ultra, a mind control program using electric shock treatment and LSD, rendering often unwilling victims permanently comatose, as well as documented deaths. Revealed to the public for the first time in 1975, as Pluto was transiting the CIA's natal Neptune. 1953, with Neptune conjunct Saturn and expansive Jupiter conjunct the US, warlike Mars, the CIA enact a bloody coup in Iran in fear of Iran nationalizing their oil. In 1954, United Fruit and the CIA enlisted Master of Mass Persuasion Edward Bernays to demonize the democratically elected government of Guatemala, whom had decided to nationalize their fruit industry. Using fake news reports instead of ads, Bernays pretended Guatemala was a communist threat on America's doorstep, a highly successful technique he called engineering consent. Bernays, born of the profoundly influential Neptune conjunct Pluto generation of the 1890s, had a long history of engineering consent. From cunningly connecting women's lib to cigarettes in the 1920s to masterminding for his chemical clients the introduction of fluoride to water in 1950. Born of this era came the terms emotional blackmail and polite fiction, a term referring to a social scenario in which all participants are aware of the truth but pretend to believe in some alternative version of events to avoid conflict or embarrassment. Neptune in Libra seems far from the cordial and compromise we so associate with the sign, but instead a self-interested moral superiority typical of Neptune in an air sign took over the era. This would eventually work in reverse, as this generation born with Neptune in Libra would have the moral conviction to create the biggest anti-war movement in history.
With a hasty word you can recall, so if I broke.
With Neptune in the rational air sign and its polarity of uncompromising Aries, a whole array of logical theories were established at the time to support the balance of power concept. Both Nash's equilibrium theory and the prisoner's dilemma theory, proposing that humans will always logically choose personal gain over cooperation, with the concept that stable equilibrium could only be achieved through mutual distrust. As such, the US and the USSR were locked into a safe equilibrium of mutually assured destruction, or so the theory went. Neptune in Libra's obsession with stability made popular the static balance of nature theory and balance theory about one's changing attitudes and the drive for psychological balance, not to be confused with economic balance theory, also arriving with Neptune in the sign of the scales, as well as the fairness doctrine introduced in the US to guarantee balanced media, repealed by Ronald Reagan as Neptune in Capricorn squared the original Neptune in Libra degree. The uncompromising Aries polarity with public choice theory, like game theory, rationale that it was illogical to support cooperation over personal gain.
The balance of nature is a major force in the survival of man, whereas the modern chemist, the modern biologist, the modern scientist believes that man is steadily controlling nature.
Neptune in logical Libra trine Aquarian Ayn Rand's natal sun brought her rational objectivism to prominence.
I'm challenging the moral code of altruism, the precept that man's moral duty is to live for others.
Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the cutest that I've ever seen. Give him two lips like roses and clover. Then tell him that his lonesome nights are over. Sandman.
Neptune in Libra wasn't all balance of power and manipulation. Neptune in image-conscious Libra created a golden era for design. Both the Uranus trine and later the square inspired modernism in both architecture and design.
Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream.
Now with Neptune in aesthetic Libra, Indra Devi, later known as the First Lady of Yoga, opens the first yoga studio in Hollywood, with the media now focusing on the beauty benefits of yoga, with celebrities like Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Arden becoming devotees.
On your magic beam, Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream.
As photos from the era show, even the poorer working class were becoming fashion conscious with a certain collective Libran aesthetic.
Mr. Sandman,
Yes?
bring us a dream. Give him a pair of eyes with a come hither gleam. Give him a lonely heart like Pagliacci. And lots
The
of
Neptune
wavy
square
hair like
domestic Cancer period brought floral prints and the happy homemaker look to prominence.
someone to hold would be so peachy before we're too old. So please.
With Neptune in Venus-ruled Libra aspecting Uranus in voluptuous Cancer, the actresses of the day inspired the sweater girl look. In 1946, with Neptune square Saturn conjunct Pluto in self-expressive Leo, a new swimsuit called the bikini was introduced, but was declared sinful by the Vatican and was banned in a multitude of countries. Pluto's long transformative reign in family-oriented Cancer had brought great change to the traditional family structure. Now with the nuclear family being the new ideal, and dark Pluto and individualistic Leo now forming a long-running sextile to Neptune.
Kiss me once, then kiss me twice, then kiss me once again. It's been a long, long time. Haven't felt like this, my dear, since can't remember when. It's been a long, long time. You'll never know how many dreams I dream about you, or just how empty they all seem without you. So kiss me once, then kiss me twice, then kiss me once again. It's been a long, long time.
literature, the term Kafkaesque first arrived in 1946, relating to the 1900s writer and stories with nightmarishly complex or bizarre qualities. Fiction at this time often displayed the plutonic qualities of outwardly successful people with pervasive and destructive inner faults. With the Neptunian scales of justice aspecting radical Uranus, beat writers appeared with many authors of the day to question mainstream obedience. With Libra's keen gaze on relationships, romance comics and magazines made their debut. Highlighting the competitive Aries polarity, American cultural anthropologist Margaret Mead in the late 1940s argued that dating was no longer about sex or marriage, but was instead about a competitive game for boys and girls to demonstrate their popularity. With women's magazines of the time explaining ways to look popular, including sending yourself flowers and making sure dates with popular men were set in the most public environment possible. This was accompanied by the new teenage going steady culture, where unlike those of previous generations, peers had a much larger influence on the relationship than the family. While mainstream culture was conservative with firmly entrenched traditional gender roles, in opposition to this dominant culture, bohemian intellectuals known as Beatniks arrived on the scene. Prelude to the hippie culture of the 1960s, expressing the suppressed individualism of Pluto and Leo through a host of Libran values like equality, feminism, and acceptance of homosexuality, as well as Neptunian mysticism, drug use, and environmental awareness, all themes deemed radical by society at the time. The anti-consumerist hipster Beatniks were into jazz music and poetry.
My old man was a bread stasher all his life. He never got fat. He wound up with a used car, a 17-inch screen, and arthritis. Tamari is a drag, man. Tamari is a king-size bust.
Although homosexuality had been actively witch-hunted during the Uranus square to Neptune McCarthyism era, this was also the debut of the popular genre of lesbian pulp fiction. Although due to strict censorship laws, the novels always had to have tragic endings, as to not be confused with proselytizing homosexuality. Art working with the Uranian square and deeply individualistic Pluto and Leo, abstract expressionist artists like Jackson Pollock brought New York to the center of the art world. Neptune in Venus sign was a golden era for pin-up girls. In music, with Neptune and Libra, a more conservative symphonic style gained popularity, with the success of crooners reaching its apex during Neptune's square to Uranus in emotional Cancer.
Go!
Although classic pop music dominated this period, with musical producers instead of recording bands were finding singers for particular songs, taking various genres and creating pop versions. Whereas the Virgo-Neptune era placed the emphasis on the complex orchestration, Neptune and Libra focused on the song and its apparent catchiness.
Come on to my house, I'm gonna give you Christmas tree. Come on to my house, I'm gonna give you marriage ring and the
With Libra and Neptune aspecting technical Uranus, the first solid body electronic guitars are available and have a huge impact on music of the time, developing many of the earlier aspects of rock and roll. With this era's prominence of technological Uranus, both a trine and a square, it's no surprise the innovations of music technology. The French duo Pierre Schaeffer and Pierre Henry in the early 1940s looped various recorded sounds into an audio collage, challenging the concept of what could be considered music. At the same time in the UK, Daphne Oram, a BBC engineer, was chaining tape machines together, experimenting with loops, and created BBC's first synthetic score. Bill Putnam was on the cutting edge, creating basic equalizers, and although artificial reverb had been created in the previous technological Virgo era, Putnam was one of the first to realize the lush Venetian sound of echo and reverb could artistically enhance recordings. Within a decade, no recording would be without it. With Nashville now firmly on the map, a new sound of country music emerges with both Libran pop sensibility and rhythmic influences of future rock and roll.
Moving in. I'm free, I'm ready, so we can go steady. So how about saving all your time for me? Ain't no more looking, I know.
Hank Williams, a top folk singer and songwriter, was given Montgomery's biggest funeral yesterday to the tune of scraping fiddles, weeping, and the hillbilly hymns of his buddies.
Meanwhile, with Hollywood already well conservatized by the Hays Code, in 1947, with Neptune's sextile Saturn conjunct Pluto in Leo, actor Ronald Reagan and animator Walt Disney testified to the evils of communism and named several actors and directors and animators as secret communists to be blacklisted. Followed up by the Saturn-Neptune conjunction of 1952 in legal Libra, known as the McCarthy era, where circumstantial evidence was used to silence influential liberals in Hollywood. With Pluto and Leo's new long-running sextile to Neptune, the dark melodrama of film noir appears.
Let's say that you'd like to get rid of your wife.
There may come a time when a lass needs a lawyer, but diamonds are a girl's best friend. There may come a time when a hard-boiled employer thinks you're awful nice, but get that ice or else no dice. He's your guy when stocks are high, but beware when they start to descend.
The Uranus-Neptune aspects bringing sci-fi to the masses. After decades of declining church membership, family values were now in vogue. With Uranus square Neptune, Christianity was sold as an antidote to the evils of communism. With after much behind-the-scenes lobbying, the US adds the words "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance.
Fly the ocean in a silver plane. See the jungle when it's wet with rain.
The previous Neptune Virgo era had created great distrust in big business while promoting workers' rights through unions. Now, with corporate America on the verge of marrying and merging its way into multinational corporations, millions of dollars were invested in pro-Christian, anti-communist, anti-union PR campaigns, creating Christian political lobby groups, placing ministers in high-profile political positions where capitalism was explained as the soulmate of Christianity. Well-funded and politically in favor, a gospel of free enterprise Christian libertarianism took hold, promoting what was seen as a Christian revival. As charismatic Neptune in Libra squared radical Uranus in home and country Cancer, extreme right-wing preacher Billy Graham rises to celebrity status, promoting the new capitalist Christian doctrine and becoming a spiritual advisor for several consecutive US presidents. In 1953, with a litigating Saturn conjunct Neptune square Uranus, science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard creates the Church of Scientology. With the alien Uranus square to Neptune, other UFO-based religions gained moderate popularity in this period. At the same time, a Muslim revival was spreading in the Middle East, with one of the fathers of radical Islam, Muslim Brotherhood leader Sayyid Qutb, who influenced the modern jihad movement. With his obsessive belief in the unification of Islam by a Sharia law and his militant disdain for Western democracy.
I fell for you, and I knew the vision of your love. I hope and I pray that someday I'll be the vision of your happiness. Oh, earth angel, please be mine, my darling dear.
With Neptune and Saturn exactly conjunct and feminine Venus opposite radical Uranus in 1952, Christine Jorgensen becomes an international sensation after changing sex from male to female. In 1956, with Uranus square Neptune in the last degrees of Libra and judicial Jupiter conjunct Pluto, the US government sanctions the burning of Wilhelm Reich's collection of books and papers. Reich's fundamental belief in liberation through orgasm was in direct conflict with the Freudian status quo. As Neptune went into sex sign Scorpio, his theories would regain popularity. With the success of antibiotics in the 40s, the pharmaceutical industry started wining and dining doctors with an advertising campaign to make their drugs the new normality.
None of us know very much about this drug in any verifiable way. Well, Bill, it's been about 2 hours since you got the drug. How do you feel?
Fantastic.
I hope and I pray that someday I'll be the vision of your happiness. Oh,
What's that? H? H? What's H? That's a lie. It's heroin.
Awful in love with you.
I've never seen such infinite beauty in my life. It's like a curtain or a spider web. Can you see it? It's right here in front of me, right now. Watch. No. Oh, good heavens.
April 16, 1943, with Neptune in Libra sextile transformed of Pluto, trine a Uranian stellium in Gemini, Albert Hofmann first experiments with LSD. Experiments would continue therapeutically during this time till Neptune in Scorpio would bring LSD into the spotlight.